No. Sorry. Ok. Hello. Hola a todos. Buenas tardes o buenos días a los que os conectáis desde Latinoamérica. Vamos a comenzar el nuevo webinar de EsAgua. En este caso, la sostenibilidad del agua para inversores, lecciones aprendidas del análisis realizado a algunos inversores en Holanda. Antes de comenzar y antes de que contemos con la presencia de Rick Hogeboom de Water Footprint Network, voy a hacer una breve introducción sobre EsAgua para aquellos que no lo conocéis. Comentaros que EsAgua es la red pionera en España de entidades comprometidas con un uso sostenible del agua y que creen en el indicador como la huella hídrica y huella de agua para realizar este cálculo y hacer un análisis. Esta red la dinamizamos desde EsAgua y contamos entre los promotores con Water Footprint Network, la red a nivel internacional referente en este ámbito. También contamos con colaboradores, que son entidades que tienen experiencia en el cálculo de huella y que también están comprometidos con su difusión. Y además participan entidades, empresas que están comprometidas con hacer una reducción de su huella hídrica y, por tanto, hacer un uso sostenible del agua. ¿Qué implica o qué buscamos hacer desde EsAgua? Desde EsAgua tratamos de aportar valor en este ámbito, dar a conocer este concepto de uso sostenible de agua y huella hídrica, tanto a las entidades que participan para que puedan entre ellas compartir buenas prácticas, hacer difusión de lo que realizan, etcétera, como hacia afuera para que haya más entidades, empresas o instituciones que lo conozcan y podamos ayudar a difundir este concepto. Las entidades que se adhieren se comprometen a hacer unas ciertas acciones en este ámbito, sobre todo en la materia de difusión, y a las empresas que se adhieren se les asocia una categoría en función de lo avanzados que estén en este ámbito, desde el cálculo hasta el cálculo, realización de acciones de reducción, comunicación, etcétera. Ya llevaremos varios webinars realizados. Este, de hecho, en concreto, es el sexto. Podéis revisarlos en nuestro canal de YouTube o en nuestro blog de EsAgua. Podéis encontrar los anteriores si es que os interesan. Para más información y si alguno estuviera interesado bien en adherirse o tuvieseis alguna pregunta, podéis encontrarnos en info@esagua.es o también podéis conectaros vía nuestra página web www.esagua.es vía el email de contacto y también encontraréis información relativa a huella hídrica, etcétera, que os puede interesar. Antes de dar paso al presentador, de este caso con quien contamos hoy, comentaros que este webinar va a ser grabado, que también lo pondremos a disposición en la página web de EsAgua, y comentaros que si tenéis preguntas, dado que no podéis hablar, sí que tenéis el sistema de webinar a través del cual nos podéis ir enviando por escrito las preguntas y al final de todo dispondremos de tiempo con Rick para poder hacérselas. Ahora voy a hacer un cambio de idioma porque como tenemos a Rick como presentador y lo va a hacer en inglés, voy a hacer yo también un cambio. So, I was now mentioning that today we count with Rick Hogeboom, the Executive Director for Water Footprint Network, the benchmark network, the reference network in this topic throughout the world. He will today be giving this presentation in which he intends to tell us, well, which is the framework for evaluation and application of water sustainability indicators, and in particular the water footprint, in order to be able that investors can make better decisions in terms of water sustainability. They did an assessment to several companies in Holland, and he will explain both how to consider this and the lessons learned from these implementations. So now, Rick, well, first of all, thank you for being with us today. I will give you the word and the control of the presentation.
Okay, let's see if it works. Thank you so much, Nayara. I'm happy to be here. Let's see if I'm actually in control of the slides. Yes, something is moving. That is great. Okay, wonderful. So thanks, Nayara, for this platform, for this introduction, and thank you all for participating in this webinar. I'll share today some insights that I drew from a study that I recently concluded with some co-authors of mine. And let me start with a few notes up front for you to better place me. I am not an insider to the financial sector. Let's start with that. I'm with the Water Footprint Network, a non-profit network organization with partners and professionals from across sectors, be it in academia or in government, NGOs, businesses, practitioners. And we are striving with the Water Footprint Network to promote the transition to fair, smart use of water worldwide, using the water footprint concept. And the study that I will present today was actually born out of an academic endeavor, because I am also affiliated with the University of Twente. That's why you see the logo of the university there as well. And I carried out this work on the water sustainability of investors because of this other affiliation. And my research there focuses on management of global water systems, or water systems at global scale, I should say. And I investigate basically how much fresh water we have available at the global level, the supply side, and I try to calculate how much we need for farms, firms, families to produce feed, food, fuel, and fiber. In other words, the demand side. So I can balance the supply and demand. I'm actually a water accountant, keeping track of how much comes in and how much is spent. And then also we can see where we are overspending. So I am speaking as an academic mainly today with a water background. And I am assuming from the registration list that some of you are from the financial sector. And if therefore at some point you think this guy is really talking nonsense, that is not how it goes in the financial sector, then you are probably right. And I hope you will excuse me for that. Nevertheless, I do think that I can share some insights from a water perspective on activities relating to the investor community and be helpful in straddling this gap between the investor community on the one hand and the water community on the other. Now, let's see if indeed this moves to the next sheet. There's a bit of a delay I already noticed in the preparation for this webinar on the line when I press my control buttons and for the screen to read. It seems like we are there now. So I'll, that was a bit too soon. I will start with first, why bother about water sustainability in the first place, followed by my definition of water sustainability. This will be a bit of a lengthy background context, which I think is relevant for building the case towards the framework that I will explain later. Then I'll explain this assessment framework that we developed for investors and the results. And I would like to focus on some general lessons that we learned from it, took away from this exercise, and conclude with an outlook of what may be on the horizon for investors in relation to the water resources domain. Yes. So why bother about water sustainability at all? I am an optimist by nature, actually, but I did feel I had to share a few grim stories, a few grim pictures, just to make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to the issues that I'm talking about, and also what we can anticipate towards the future, the near future, I would say, to establish some sense of urgency on the matter of water sustainability. Because around the world, we see rivers running dry and drained before they even reach the ocean because of over-abstraction, because of needless wasting. Pollution contaminated much of our stocks, particularly groundwater stocks, rendering the remaining water resources unsuitable for use. And we turn some rivers to rivers of plastic. Ecosystems are being deprived of water, vital to sustain life, reduce biodiversity, it erodes land, it erodes the resilience to shocks, and on top of that, competition over the limited available resources leads to conflicts and social tensions in many places. It hampers economic momentum because businesses do not have access to sufficient fresh water. Dry rivers, dead fish, deprived communities. It all happens slowly, not in an instant, like with a flood or with an earthquake. So you could say that this scarcity, these shortages, it's a sort of misery in slow motion. A misery in slow motion. And add to that expected population growth, economic development, and climate change. And you can see the challenge that we are up for as humanity in the 21st century when it comes to water. So can we prevent humanity as a whole from crossing certain tipping points for planetary boundaries How can we ensure that ecosystems and societies and economies survive these water crises or even thrive? And for that, I think we really need to reconsider fundamentally how we are dealing with our water systems and with our water resources. Let's see, because water availability on a global scale is limited. And although it is renewable, you can only consume it once at a particular time in a particular place. And there is therefore an opportunity cost to its use. And we need to know how the water that we do have is being allocated. I do see that now there is either a larger delay or it's not moving on to the next sheet. Apologies for that. Yes, there we go. So water availability is limited. There we go. But the demand, the other side of the equation, we see demand is actually growing quite excessively. And we apply the water footprint as an indicator to measure this water consumption, this water use. And we calculated the claims of humans on water systems, on green water, that is the rainwater insofar as it doesn't become runoff, on blue water, which is the surface water and the groundwater that you can find in rivers, streams, lakes, and aquifers, and also on gray water, which is a measure for pollution. And if you are a little bit into the world of water footprinting, then these colors are, of course, very familiar to you. So I won't spend much detail on that. But if we compare the global demand with the global supply, we can see where we are actually overspending and where water scarcity emerges. And this map shows how often monthly blue water footprints exceed their maximum sustainable level. Very simplified, the situation is bad in the yellow to red areas, and in the green it is okay still. Unfortunately, 2/3 of the world population, or roughly 4 billion people, live in the red and yellow colored regions. And such a global map is quite general, but and therefore perhaps a bit abstract. But I think it gets exciting if we can trace back these scarcity effects to specific human activities. What specifically causes this misery? What causes the red color? Can we map that? And turns out we can. Oh, that was too quick. Let's zoom in on one compound of humanity's water footprint map, for instance. What you see here is the water footprint related to Dutch consumption. I'm from the Netherlands, so I had to take an example from the Netherlands, and we traced back the water along the entire value chain of the products and services that are consumed by the Dutch, that I consume as an average citizen of the Netherlands. And everywhere where you see on this map a color, a yellow color, water is used to produce things that the Dutch eat or buy. So what do we buy? What do we eat? Well, for instance, strawberries from Spain. That explains some of the yellow colors in Spain, but also cotton from Central Asia, soybean from Brazil. And I think it's quite neat that we can track that, right? To keep track of our water use to such detailed activities and products. And for every pixel on this map, we know what the products are or the services are that are below this. Now, what if we overlay this footprint map with the scarcity map that I showed earlier with the red and the green colors? There it shows which part of the footprint of the Dutch consumption is within ecological boundaries and which part is not. And there we learned that 43% of the blue water footprint comes at the cost of water that is actually needed for the environment, or what we might label as ecologically unsustainable water use. And we can point that again to only 6 countries for almost 2/3 of this total. Are you shifting to? Yeah, okay, so thanks. Let's keep it at the map for now. We can see, for instance, that we get olives too from Spain that are grown in regions that are considered water scarce, or pistachios from Iran and Pakistan also colors very red and tops this list. So more specifically, what you see coloring red is the Indus River Basin. So let's have a closer look at the next slide for only this this example of the Indus Basin. What you see in the next slide, if it comes up. Let's see, I don't want to press it too often because then we are already going too quickly through everything. No, that was the one we already saw. And back. And then this, now it should be, yes, there we go. This is, or at least was, part of the Indus River dolphin. And this is one of the world's rarest mammals, and it's highly endangered according to the World Wildlife Fund. And the population has declined because of various reasons, but in large part also due to water pollution, due to pesticide runoff that can be tied to sugarcane production, which is exported to, among other countries, the Netherlands. So this goes to show, as just one minor example, that we can link particular scarcity impacts to particular products or end users. So the sweet tooth, if you will, of us Dutch consumers can be partially traced back to the decline in endangered river dolphins in Pakistan. And yeah, I think that's quite nice that we can show that on such a resolution. Now, I showed this, of course, only for the Dutch consumers, but you can imagine that we can make these maps for individual companies as well, and also for business activities. Oh, bit messing up with the slides, I'm sorry for that. So we can map entire value chains like this, and we can identify hotspot regions or regions of concern. So as an investor, making a bridge a little bit, or as an asset manager, do you know, or do you want to know, or maybe should you know, how your portfolio maps against water scarcity, how your portfolio maps against pollution? Can your business activities be tied to dead dolphins? Can your business activities be tied to deprived communities? What information would you need from potential investees to answer these questions? That's a first hint towards the framework that I will discuss in a bit. Aside from using too much water, causing scarcity, we are also wasting a lot of it needlessly. And here we trace the water footprint of wheat, if we get the world to see again. So I assume you figured out by now that red is bad and green is good, right? So in the green areas, producers need only 600 liters, in this case, to produce 1 ton of product, whereas in the red areas, producers need more than double or even more than that to produce that same ton of wheat. And let's see, well, the main reason is the application of inefficient irrigation techniques, such as the sprinkler systems, where half the water is, for instance, already gone before to the atmosphere before the plant even got the chance to use it to grow. And the effect on specific water systems, in another example, tying back particular human products and activities to its inefficient use, is shown here in the ruining of the Aral Sea because of inefficient cotton production. So as an investor, do you want to invest in activities that cause situations like these? Or are you at least aware that your funds enable these kinds of inefficient business practices? Do you have any clue about how potential investees score against a benchmark, for instance, for efficient water use in their sector or in their domain? Do you encourage the adoption of best available technologies? The last issue I will mention here in this context of broader water sustainability is the issue of fair sharing. Now, I know it's a tricky topic to determine what comprises actual equitable sharing of water resources, but you can imagine that unequitable sharing, especially with rising pressure and competition over available resources, may impact both business operations and is undesirable from a societal perspective. This is a short example from Coca-Cola in India some years ago, where their bottling plant was actually accused of lowering the groundwater table so much that the local community wells in the vicinity fell dry, leading to protests and reputational damage. So as investor, wouldn't you want to know if issues over competition or issues over allocation in the region where you want to invest are a reality? If you are planning new business activities there, or if you are expanding existing activities, wouldn't you want to know what piece of the local water pie you are claiming for yourself, and at what societal cost, maybe? So what I've just shown about scarcity, using too much, wasting, using it inefficiently, and sharing between the different competing uses of water all relates to what I would call water sustainability in the broadest sense. And I can sum it up in these three dimensions: sustainable scale, efficient allocation, and equitable distribution. And these dimensions encompass economic, environmental, and social concerns, and these are widely known and used in sustainability literature, where sustainable scale refers to not using too much in absolute terms to avoid scarcity and overexploitation, where efficient allocation means not wasting it to avoid inefficient or unproductive use, and equitable distribution alludes to the fair sharing between the various social actors to mitigate inequality and conflict. And these dimensions we operationalized using the water footprint concept. And for the sake of time, I won't elaborate on the exact operationalization here, but I'll share later on some documents where we lay that out in more detail. So with this definition of sustainability, I should probably point out, especially if you are from the financial sector, that it is not the same as water risks per se, because I quickly understood talking to financial folks that you love to talk about risks, also water risks. But water sustainability, in my definition, concerns the proper functioning of natural systems, for the well-being of social systems, and for the enabling of sustained economic systems. So that goes a bit beyond water risks in a more narrow definition that I came across quite often. Also, considering water sustainability thus in investment decisions does therefore not merely mean investing in the water sector. Virtually every company depends on water for either its direct operations or in its supply chain. And it's those water considerations that we are targeting here. Water sustainability policy thus concerns investments in any sector, not in infrastructure or not just in treatment facilities. So that's also an important distinction. And let me be clear that achieving this water sustainability is a shared responsibility, where all actors have to play a role: governments, companies, consumers, but via their portfolios, also investors. Now, what can investors do? What is their role? That's what we are interested in here. So, tying this whole context story to the study we did on investors, yeah, we are getting there, don't worry. The question that we wanted to answer is, how do investors incorporate water sustainability criteria in investment decisions? Now, ideally, we here to look on the ground, right? We investigate each and every company in an investor's portfolio and see how much water they use, how much water they pollute, and if that is sustainable in the local context. But you can also imagine that that is not very feasible for a desk-bound academic such as myself. So we had to base our assessment instead on the policy documents that were released by the considered investors. Publicly disclosed policies, that is. Otherwise, we could not, or we would not be able to access them and to appoint scores. So first, we developed an assessment framework that consists of 9 categories along the 3 dimensions of what constitutes water sustainability, as I defined it earlier. So the bottom 3 categories here, I don't know if you see your pointer, but the bottom 3 pillars are efficient water use, environmental sustainability, and social equity. These are each split into a part addressing the direct operations of the companies invested in, and a part addressing the supply chain of effective investment of activities. So for most companies, the lion's share actually of their water consumption is in this supply chain part. So it's crucial to include a supply chain focus here. Now, you can only, that is the core of the framework, I would say, the efficient environmental and social pillars, but you can only substantiate these if you know what claim the prospective activity will put on local water resources, right? What claim will it have? So you need to account for the water use and the water pollution if you want to do that. So that's why we included this other category of water accounting, to get a sense of the order of magnitude. What are we talking about? How much pollution, how much water used? And finally, there is the top category, category A, disclosure, and that is there both to allow the general public to hold the water accountable, investors needing to be transparent about their claims on water. It facilitates the debate, and very conveniently also in this study, it helped us to base our scores on. So on this rough framework, behind this, there are, for each category, several criteria. We formulated these criteria as closed questions, and the answer to those questions result in a score. Again, these are questions that an investor's policy should or could answer or ask prospective investees about prospective investees if they are to meaningfully assess water issues related to that investment. We selected 20 large Dutch investors in the Netherlands, banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and we scored them based on their publicly disclosed policy documents. Now, luckily I had a student I was supervising to help me go through these endless ESG analyses or annual reports or CSR reports, sustainability assessment, responsibility, investment assessments, triple bottom line studies, and all the other different flavors there are of assessments that you can think of in this area. And trying to find answers to these 50 or so criteria or questions that we have behind this framework, we ended up scrutinizing 226 documents and 44 unique websites from these investors. Now, luckily we managed, and we ended up with this scoring and ranking. These are Dutch investors, so you may not recognize all the names, but some of them I think are quite active beyond the Netherlands, so you may recognize the names. The colors here correspond to the assessment categories that you see in the corner graph, and the number behind each bar for each investor gives the percentage score out of a total of a score of 100. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is actually the low overall scores. At least that's what struck us. Even the highest scoring investor, in this case that's NIBC Direct, which is a business bank, indicates that investors' ambitions on water sustainability have not really trickled down, at least not yet, to effectuate clear water policy. And so investors do score points on disclosure and reporting, the gray category, or the first bar of the total. This is a first step, right? That's also a readily doable step. But that in itself does not guarantee that you also are water sustainable. It only means you say something about it. So accounting then, the orange or brownish categories also scores points for most investors, but mainly in the direct operations only. So that would indicate that the supply chain part of the value chain is being overlooked by most investors. Nevertheless, NIBC tops the list, and their scores reflect that they consider each of the dimensions of broader sustainability, meaning efficient water use, environmental sustainability, and social equity in their investment policies, at least to some degree. Now, let's then zoom into NIBC, just for some example to see how they got this score. This is a still from a small Excel tool that we developed and that we provide with the paper, and that will give a glimpse about how we came to these scores. So for any investor and for any indicator and the combination, you can see for yourself how we came to the score. And I will share a link at the end of the webinar so you can download it and check it if you want to. But here you see for NIBC that they scored full points on indicator 1 of category B, or the accounting in operations indicator, by answering the question or the criterion, does the investor mention aspects of accounting for water use and pollution caused by the operations of its investment? So do they mention anything about accounting in the operations? And, well, we found a satisfactory answer here. Where did we find it? We found it in this in source 11, the GRI content index, where it states that no water resources are significantly affected by withdrawal of water due to NIBC's operations. Okay, so that answer that we found in this report earned them the full 2 points on this question. Now, for this one, the investor only had to mention something that relates to accounting to get the points. But we roughly followed a progressive scoring approach, meaning that the first questions in the framework can be earned relatively easily, probing investors' awareness of the topic, do they even consider it, but that scoring on subsequent questions becomes increasingly difficult to do. So that is, for instance, the case for another example for NIBC, where we proceed to the indicators for category G. And let's see if my screen is also willing to make that little shift. Yes, there you go. So now we are in the blue pillar, category G, on environmental sustainability of supply chains of prospective activities. And the question there came in the form, does the investor mention it assesses the water scarcity throughout the year of the water source used for the supply chain of its investment? So water scarcity in the supply chain of investments. So if you want to score on this question, you actually need quite a bit of understanding, right, of the potential issues of water on the investor's part. So you don't readily do this. You don't just write it down. So NIBC here in source 18, in their sustainability policy, show that they do give attention to this. They not only consider ecosystem impacts, but actively take measures to manage these in operations and supply chains of clients. Well, I would say that's perfect, right? They actually show that they do this. Again, this is only as deep as we could go. How that works on the ground is still to be seen. But it does go to show that NIBC, in its water policy, at least is aware of some of these major issues relating to water. Good. So summing up, we saw some good intentions that were being expressed across many policy documents that were brought out by investors. But unfortunately, these many documents also reveal that policy is not well demarcated. Scores could always be awarded based on multiple documents rather than it was scattered, rather than it was in one referable place. Moreover, they were not clearly formulated. So, meaning policies were written in often vague or ambiguous terms, and with a not so meaningful emphasis. For instance, installing water-efficient toilets at the investor's headquarters. We saw that a number of times. It's definitely a praiseworthy exercise, and therefore we even awarded some points to some of the in the framework. But truly addressing water sustainability clearly goes quite a bit beyond such minor contributions at home. Or another example, water savings made by an investment that was reporting on may, for instance, be expressed in how many Olympic-sized swimming pools were being saved. Apparently, that's a very standard measure of water saving, Olympic-sized swimming pools, which is fine on the one hand, but it's not very meaningful if you do not place this number in some sort of proper context, or if you compare it to a certain standard of what would have been possible or reasonable. So that it leaves a lot of questions open. We also found that the financial sector is actually unbelievably complex. There are it was complicating our assignment for sure, because there are countless financial products, dedicated funds, green funds even, unclear relations between the investor and the asset managers that there are, or between the holding firm and the subsidiaries. Each often have their own investment policy, and about which it is unclear which policy is leading at which times, and sometimes they are even at odds with one another. So they contradict themselves in the various policies that they have. So you almost need a PhD to just understand how the current financial system works. And sadly, this all hampered, of course, the development of sound water policies for these investors. Disclosure, I mentioned that the gray bars in the framework is getting there. A lot of investors do disclose things related to water and accounting to some degree. So they do seem to be they are making the step towards also measuring their water consumption and monitoring that. But more is needed than is the case today, for sure, to ensure sustainable water practice. For instance, by looking beyond the fence line of the companies invested in, and also consider the supply chain of prospective investment activities, in addition to these clients' direct operations. A positive development that we found here is that several investors, such as, for instance, ABN AMRO, apply a sector-specific approach where they develop sector-specific water policies targeting water-intensive or pollution-prone industries and sectors such as food and beverage, or mining or apparel, to address challenges specific to that sector. And lastly, we discovered how a lack of mutual understanding and exchange between the investor community and their bubble and the water management community in our bubble inhibits the development of sound, practical, and science-based water investment policies. Perhaps you knew most I have shared just now, but in most documents we scrutinized for this assessment, that certainly did not demonstrate that these insights landed with each investor yet. So looking ahead, what do I see on the horizon? First, there is an undeniable growth in interest from the financial sector in water issues. There are more and more dedicated events popping up. I have attended quite a few in the last year alone already. I see more and more impact or green bonds or other seemingly sustainable investment products being brought to market. And also we were approached by many of these Dutch investors that we investigated in this study afterwards to sit with them and to help them improve. And I would say that is all great and wonderful. On the other hand, it's also about time, right? Because after all, investors are a very powerful actor group, and an actor group that is only just now starting to assert itself in the water arena. Even though investment decisions that are made today in the boardrooms of investors profoundly influence the state and shape of tomorrow's water resources. Because you can imagine if you invest in a mining operation that is run inefficiently or polluting in a polluting way, that will remain polluting and remain wasting water for decades to come. So they have a much larger influence than they think or are aware of. So the interest is definitely growing. But at the same time, from the water field, it is clear that the pressures on the water resources also are growing around the world. And we cannot assume that the way we operate businesses tomorrow will be the same as we operate them today, as we are approaching the boundaries of what the natural systems can carry or sustain. I therefore firmly believe that not only water risks will materialize more often and at a higher expense, but also that risk exposure is undoubtedly going to grow. Investors need to become much more aware of this exposure because by and large, they have no idea. They are lagging behind on corporations who are typically more water aware of their own business activities. But even then, I think that risk exposure is grossly underestimated by both companies and investors. I also expect some amped up regulation to speed up the transition as governments are paying closer attention to water too. They may, for instance, issue fewer permits or they demand stricter efficiency compliance if they do issue a permit. We see pricing schemes, water pricing schemes being introduced or adopted in many regions, or their requirement that the spatial planning, any spatial planning that is undertaken is water neutral. So that regulation may also drive change. But in any case, the essence of sustainability is to assume a long-term horizon. And Likewise, investors will have to step, therefore, away from the short-range financial performance which preoccupies much of the current market to ensure continued business operations and continued profitability in the long run to the future. Not just ticking the ESG box, ESG being environmental, social, and governance indicators in half a day spent per $100 million invested, as we saw happening today. Not just hiding behind fiduciary duty, which is another term dubbed quite often, that only concerns monetary revenues, while environmental and social costs are still being analyzed, but diligently and thoroughly analyzing water-induced implications and opportunities. So progressing here in response to all these developments, I think first calls for investors to become much more aware of the issues that they face. And a lot is still to be done here, really. But I do think that, well, the water footprint concept, but also EsAgua, for instance, in the Spanish context, is doing a great job in educating, in sharing insights with the investor community. Soon, I think that we will see investors also demand from prospective investees that they provide them with clear water accounts, for instance, water footprint accounts, water footprint assessments. And that then they will ask them to set certain targets, water reduction targets, and also meet those targets as a prerequisite for getting the funding. They have to substantiate that by showing in actual volumes, like that they can meet these targets. And last, if these targets are in place, then they do need to carry enough weight among all the other key performance indicators that an investor is considering before they are investing, so that water can actually make an influence in the investment decisions that are made. So that's, I think, the train of events that we can expect to happen. And investors that anticipate these developments already now, they can readily start, I would say, by integrating first and reviewing their own internal water policies, because I mentioned it's very scattered for most investors. So for yourself as an investor, provide clarity on the policies that you currently have in place. Do they make sense? What is logical? Can you put it in one place? And also to maybe start or find or develop practical investment practices, meaningful, sustainable investment practices together with the water community. So we cannot do that apart from one another. And really take the position, the vacant position, I would say, of becoming a front runner for other investors to follow in this theme in this water domain. The last thing I want to mention here is that water is here to stay. I see a parallel here clearly with the carbon and the climate change movement, where it took humanity 40 years to go from becoming aware that climate change was human-induced and in need of taking action to actually taking action. And water crises as the next big challenge for humanity has not been on the agenda for, say, more than a decade. And I think it is therefore safe to say that water sustainability will dominate international policy and business agenda for quite some time to come. But I also do sincerely hope that we can shorten the duration of coming to meaningful action and that we don't have to wait so long. Yes, so we would be happy to help with our knowledge and our network, so feel free to reach out. And I have a link here to the study where we describe in more detail the framework, the criteria, and there you can also download the Excel sheet to really see all the nitty-gritty details if you are interested in that. And I think that concludes it for me. I cordially invite you to join EsAgua and learn from the community there around water footprinting, where we also will give more emphasis to investors in the discourse of water footprint assessment in the coming time, I'm sure. So please keep an eye out for that. And that's all for now. I'd be happy to take any questions if they are there. So Nayara, back to you, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very interesting presentation. So I encourage the audience, if you have any questions, to share them with us. do not hesitate to do through the chat. Okay, you can do it through the system itself. I have a question for you, Rick. In the meantime, have the results been presented to the interviewees? I mean, have these investors that you have studied have a presentation of these results? And if yes, which was their feedback on that?
Well, a presentation in the sense like we are doing here now, more informally in a meeting. As I mentioned, let's start at the beginning. This exercise we did as a desk study, assessing the policies that were revealed or disclosed by the investors. So they were not directly involved in us doing the scoring of the framework that we developed. But of course, in order to get a bit of an understanding of how this whole financial sector works, we discussed a lot with asset managers and with other people from the financial sector to make sure that we understood things correctly. And only after the results were published, we sat together with some of the investors to see how, if we were on the same page. And that's actually where we even better saw the big divide in understanding. That it takes quite a while. That's why I also had a bit of a lengthy context description here. What do we actually mean with water sustainability? Because it's so far advanced from the typical investors' way of thinking that it takes a few steps of thinking before we are on the same page. So I think that this divide was very much visible in these meetings. And of course, we still have some ongoing assignments with some of the investors to also really dive into their particular policies to see how we can incorporate some of the ideas that we present in the framework that are based on water footprint assessment, basically, into their own investment policies to really integrate this framework in their own policy making. And for us, maybe then the challenge, and that's why I mentioned that at the end a little bit, is to find actual investment cases where this framework is applied in a meaningful and practical way, and really see from a number of differing cases how it works out, and if these theoretical concepts also have the potential to be practically meaningful. So there are some steps definitely to be taken there.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I understand that your feeling is that there's still some way to go in terms of making understanding this water sustainability topic, etc. Do you think that the situation, I mean, my feeling is that probably this was the Dutch investors, but probably this is applicable without having made the study. Do you think that this situation is probably applicable to investors of other countries around the world, or there might be some differences?
No, sure. We can definitely scale up this assessment framework. Actually, we are also doing that. For instance, we are now looking with the Fair Finance Guide. I don't know, I think they're also active in Spain, where they may assess financial institutions in Spain, in banks and insurance companies on various sustainability issues. So not just water, also climate, child labor, deforestation, what have you. To get more emphasis on water in these fair finance guides as well, using our framework. And also, of course, these investors that we assess, they operate globally. So their portfolios are such wide and far-reaching that they already cover global, the whole globe, basically. And the criteria or the categories that we identified in the framework are generic, right? I mean, you should not use more water than there is sustainably available in any locale, whether that be in the Netherlands or in Australia or in Spain or wherever. So yes, it's definitely something that we can scale up and that we are also doing now in the European context, at least, to also include other European investors in this study, and also to repeat this framework maybe on a biannual basis to see if we can set a benchmark there on this very specific topic of water sustainability and investment decisions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yes, I think that's a very interesting idea. If you repeat this biannually, it would be, I mean, I would be happy to see how this evolves and whether let's say that the interest on these topics and the involvement goes upwards. So we will see on that.
Yeah, our ambition is always limited by the funds, of course, from the stakeholders or the parties interested in also funding these kinds of assessments. And that's where we, of course, try to make an effort, and I know EsAgua is doing as well, to also shift maybe the attention a little bit from the whole discussion on climate, because that really dominates 99% of the discussion of sustainable investing. It's all about carbon and climate, to also consider much more this water component, and also that we therefore need frameworks, that we need examples, that we need tested policies, and need benchmarks and scorings to help investors accountable, and also to track progress there. So of course we are advocating for that to happen with all that we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Rick. Well, I don't see questions from the people connected, so I give you a last chance. If someone has any question, please put it through the system right now. If not, I think that we will going to end, Rick. It was really a pleasure having you, a really interesting presentation. So I hope that we managed to get investors more involved and more preoccupied about water sustainability. So let's keep on that.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you very much, Rick.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nayara, for hosting this webinar and for having me here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all the attendants. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this has been recorded. So this will be made available at the EsAgua network. I'm sure that also at the Water Footprint Network website there will be also a link. So thank you very much. We will share it afterwards. Bye-bye. Good afternoon to everybody.